You close a door behind you every single day. You barely think about it. Your brain treats it as nothing. But for centuries, a closed door meant something else entirely. It meant you were never coming out. Across medieval Europe, there was a punishment so quiet it left almost no trace. No blood, no public spectacle. Just a wall, built brick by brick, around a living person. Historians call it immurement. Your ancestors called it justice. Let that sink in for a moment. The condemned was placed inside a small chamber, sometimes a closet built into a monastery wall, sometimes a pit beneath a church floor. Then masons arrived. Not executioners, builders. They mixed mortar, they stacked stone, and slowly, deliberately, they sealed the opening until only a small gap remained, just wide enough to pass through a cup of water and a piece of bread. Then eventually, even that gap closed. Why would a society choose this over a sword? Because immurement avoided bloodshed, which many religious authorities considered a deeper sin than the act of killing itself. If no blood was spilled, the church could claim no one had technically been murdered. The victim, in their eyes, simply starved in the presence of God. This is the part that should unsettle you. The horror wasn't hidden, it was sanctioned. Records from convents and monasteries across France, Italy, and Germany describe nuns and monks sealed alive for breaking vows of celibacy or obedience. In 1310, a French inquisitorial record describes a woman condemned for heresy who was placed inside a wall with only a narrow slit for air. Witnesses reported hearing her voice for 3 days, then silence. 3 days. Imagine counting them from the inside. What does the human mind do in that situation? Psychologists who study extreme isolation point to a process called sensory deprivation collapse. Without light, without sound, without any predictable stimulus, the brain begins manufacturing its own reality. Hallucinations, false sounds, a creeping sense that time itself has stopped working correctly. Donald Hebb, a psychologist at McGill University, tested something close to this in the 1950s. He paid student volunteers to lie in soundproofed, lightless rooms with their senses blocked. He promised them $20 a day, a fortune at the time. Most could not last more than a few days. Some began hallucinating within hours. Some begged to leave despite the money waiting for them. Now stretch that experiment from hours into days. From days into a sealed chamber with no exit and no end date. That was immurement, not an execution, a psychological erasure. Some victims were given just enough food and water to survive longer, which historians believe was intentional. A quick death wasn't the point. The slow unraveling of the mind was. Town officials and church leaders sometimes left the sealed wall standing as a visible structure for years, a permanent monument that someone was still in there. People walked past it daily. Some even pressed their hands against the stone, feeling for warmth that had long since faded. Why do this to a person? Why build punishment instead of carrying it out quickly? Because slow, visible suffering served a different purpose than death. It wasn't meant to end a life. It was meant to control a population. A quick execution is a single moment, witnessed once, then forgotten. A sealed wall is permanent. It stands in the town square for decades. It whispers to every person who walks past it. This could be you. This is where the story turns from medieval horror into something closer to home. Modern psychology has a name for this kind of slow, sustained dread. It's called ambient threat conditioning. You don't need direct violence to control a population. You only need the visible suggestion that violence is possible, sustained over time. Researchers studying authoritarian environments and even certain workplace cultures have found that constant low-grade fear produces more long-term compliance than occasional explosive punishment. People don't need to see the violence happen. They only need to know that the wall exists. Think about that the next time you see a closed door, a locked office, a silence that feels heavier than it should. Some of the most disturbing accounts come from convents specifically. A 19th century excavation in Italy uncovered the remains of a nun sealed into a chamber barely large enough to sit in. Her skeleton was found in a crouched position, knees pulled to her chest, fingers positioned near the wall as though she had been scratching at it. Forensic analysis suggested she survived for over a week before death. A week, conscious, aware, listening to her own breathing as the only sound in the dark. It would be comforting to believe this practice ended with the medieval era, locked safely in the past behind centuries of progress. But isolation as punishment never disappeared. It simply changed its name. Solitary confinement, used in prisons around the world today, produces strikingly similar psychological effects to what those medieval victims experienced. Researchers like Stuart Grassian, who studied inmates held in extended isolation, documented a condition he called SHU syndrome, named after the special housing units where it occurs. Symptoms include hallucinations, paranoia, and a loss of the ability to track time accurately. The same unraveling Hebb saw in his lab. The same unraveling that likely happened behind those sealed medieval walls. We didn't abandon immurement, we modernized it. The chamber is no longer made of brick and mortar, it's steel and concrete. But the core mechanism remains unchanged. Remove a person from sensory and human contact, and the mind begins to dismantle itself from the inside out. Here's the question that should follow you after this video ends. How many walls exist around you right now that you've simply stopped noticing? Not literal walls. The silences you tolerate. The isolation you accept as normal. The doors you walk past without ever wondering who or what might be sealed quietly on the other side. You close the door behind you every single day. You barely think about it. Maybe you should.